The audience was laughing, but Denzel wasn't. Colbert took one more jab, and in seconds the mood shifted. Voices rose. Faces tightened, and what happened next shocked everyone watching live. The studio lights burned hotter than usual. That night, or so it seemed to the crew bustling behind the scenes of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, the Ed Sullivan Theater, a storied venue in New York City, hummed with its usual pre-show energy. Stagehands adjusted cables, producers whispered into headsets, and the audience, hundreds of eager fans packed into tiered seats, buzzed with anticipation. It was a typical Tuesday taping, one of dozens in the season, but tonight's guest was no ordinary draw. Denzel Washington, the two-time Oscar winner, was in the house to promote his latest film, a gritty crime drama that had already generated Oscar buzz of its own. Backstage, Denzel sat in the green room, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp, scanning the space with the quiet intensity that had defined his career. He wore a tailored navy suit, crisp and understated, the kind of outfit that said he didn't need to try too hard to command attention. His publicist, a wiry woman named Carla, who'd been with him for years, reviewed the talking points. Last time, they'll want to hit the film hard, she said, flipping through a clipboard. Maybe a few questions about your process, the usual stuff. Colbert's team said they might throw in some lighter bits, maybe a game, maybe a joke, about your old roles. Denzel nodded, his expression unreadable. They always want the light stuff, he murmured, almost to himself. Carla caught the tone but didn't press. She knew better. Denzel wasn't one for small talk or forced theatrics, but he was a professional. He'd done this dance 100 times, smile for the cameras, charm the host, give the audience what they wanted. Still, there was something in the air tonight, a faint undercurrent of tension that neither of them could quite place. Across the hall, Stephen Colbert was in his dressing room, adjusting his tie in the mirror. At 61, he'd mastered the art of late night hosting, his quick wit and boyish charm a perfect blend for an audience that craved both humor and substance. His staff loved him, the viewers adored him, and he had a knack for disarming even the most guarded guests. But tonight he was feeling a little extra spark. Denzel Washington wasn't just a guest. He was a legend, a man whose presence carried weight. Stephen had prepped a few zingers, nothing too sharp, just enough to keep the energy lively. He'd heard the whispers from Hollywood about Denzel's intensity on set, his uncompromising standards. Stephen's writers had floated the idea of leaning into it, just a little, to see if they could get a rise out of him. Nothing mean, Stephen had said during the pre-show meeting, just playful. The stage manager's voice crackled through the intercom. 5 minutes to air. The audience was ushered to their seats, their chatter rising to a crescendo. The house band, led by John Batiste, warmed up with a jazzy riff. Stephen strode out from his dressing room, flashing a grin at the crew. "Let's make it a good one," he said, clapping his hands. The energy was infectious, but one of the producers, a veteran named Tom, exchanged a quick glance with another staffer. They'd seen big guests before, but Denzel was different. He wasn't just a star, he was a force. The show began as it always did. Stephen's monologue, a mix of sharp political jabs and self-deprecating humor, landed well with the crowd. The audience laughed on cue, their applause warm and enthusiastic. Then came the first guest segment, a quick chat with a rising comedian who just landed a Netflix special. It was light, breezy, the kind of segment that set the tone for the night. But everyone in the room knew the real draw was coming next. Now, Stephen announced, leaning into the camera with his signature grin, "Please welcome to The Late Show, the one, the only, Denzel Washington." The crowd erupted, a wave of cheers and whistles filling the theater as Denzel stepped out from behind the curtain. He moved with the easy confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times, waving briefly to the audience before settling into the guest chair. Stephen stood to shake his hand, and the two exchanged a quick, professional smile. The lights dimmed slightly, the cameras adjusted, and the interview began. For the first few minutes, it was textbook late-night fare. Stephen lobbed softballs about the new film Redemption Road, a taut thriller about a disgraced detective seeking justice in a corrupt city. Denzel answered with his trademark gravitas, his voice low and measured, every word deliberate. He talked about the character's motivations, the director's vision, and the physical demands of the role. The audience hung on his every word, and Stephen played along, nodding enthusiastically, tossing in a few quips to keep things lively. "You know, Denzel," Stephen said, leaning back in his chair, "this role feels like it's got some echoes of Training Day, that intensity, that edge. Are you ever gonna do a sequel to that one? I mean, Alonzo Harris is still out there in our nightmares." The audience laughed, and Denzel gave a small chuckle. Shaking his head, "Alonzo's long gone, Stephen," he said, his smile warm but guarded, "but I appreciate the love for it. That was a moment in time." The banter flowed easily enough, but there was a subtle shift in the room. The audience didn't notice it, but the crew did. Denzel's answers, while polished, were clipped. He wasn't leaning into the humor as much as Stephen had hoped. The host sensed it too, and something in his demeanor changed, a glint in his eye, a slight edge to his smile. He'd done this long enough to know when a guest was holding back, and he wasn't one to let the moment slip by. Stephen leaned forward, his voice dropping just enough to draw the audience in. "Denzel, I gotta ask, some people in Hollywood, they say you've gotten, well, let's say difficult to work with. Is that true?" He punctuated the question with a playful smirk, as if to say, "We're just having fun here." The crowd let out a nervous chuckle, unsure whether this was a setup for a punchline or something else entirely. Denzel's smile faded, just a fraction, but enough for those paying attention to notice. He tilted his head, his eyes locking onto Stephen's with an intensity that seemed to cut through the studio lights. "Difficult," Denzel said, his voice calm but carrying a weight that silenced the room. "You mean I hold people to a standard?" The audience let out a soft ooh, sensing the shift. Stephen, still smirking, leaned back, trying to keep the tone light. "I'm just saying some folks think you take things too seriously, that you can't take a joke." He waved a hand as if to dismiss any tension, but the words hung in the air like a challenge. That was it. The air in the studio changed, as if someone had flipped a switch. The laughter died, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Denzel leaned forward now, his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze never leaving Stephen's. The host's smirk faltered just for a moment, but he recovered quickly, ready to pivot back to humor, but Denzel wasn't playing along. "Stephen," he sighed, his voice low and deliberate, "there's a difference between a joke and disrespect. And sometimes you cross that line." The audience erupted in another low ooh, this time louder, more visceral. A few people clapped, instinctively siding with Denzel's calm but commanding presence. Stephen's eyes flickered toward the crew, a subtle plea for backup, but the control room was as stunned as the audience. The producer, Tom, muttered into his headset, stay on them. Stephen tried to laugh it off, waving a hand. "Come on, Denzel, we're just having a little fun here. It's late-night TV." But his voice betrayed a hint of unease, the kind that comes when you realize you've miscalculated. Denzel didn't blink. "You bring people on here to talk, Stephen, not to tear them down for entertainment." His words were measured, but they carried the weight of a man who'd spent decades navigating an industry that often tried to reduce him to a caricature. The audience was silent now, hanging on every syllable. This wasn't the usual late-night banter. This was something raw, something real. Stephen shifted in his chair, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Denzel stood up. The crowd gasped, a collective sound that echoed through the theater. It wasn't a dramatic flourish. Denzel didn't storm off or make a scene. He simply rose, his movements deliberate, and reached for the microphone clipped to his lapel. With a practiced ease, he removed it, placed it gently on the desk, and looked at Stephen one last time. "You can have your fun," Denzel said, his voice steady, "without me." And then he walked off stage. The cameras scrambled to follow, but the director, sensing the moment slipping out of control, cut to a wide shot of Stephen, who sat frozen behind his desk. For the first time that night, maybe the first time in years, the host was speechless. The audience didn't know whether to clap, gasp, or stay silent. A few murmurs rippled through the crowd, but most sat stunned, unsure if they'd just witnessed a staged moment or the realest clash in late night TV history. Backstage, the chaos was immediate. Carla, Denzel's publicist, was already on her feet, meeting him as he stepped through the curtain. "You okay?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. Denzel nodded, his expression calm but resolute. "I'm fine," he said. "I said what?" I needed to say. He didn't look back as he headed for the exit, his team falling in step behind him. In the control room, pandemonium reigned. Producers shouted over each other, trying to figure out how to salvage the segment. "Go to commercial!" Tom barked, and the feed cut to a pre-recorded ad for a car company. "Steven, still on stage?" Forced a smile as the cameras went dark. "Well," he said to the audience, his voice strained, "that was unexpected." A few nervous laughs broke the tension, but the energy in the room was fractured. The aftermath was swift and seismic. By the time the show aired later that night, clips of the exchange were already circulating on X, sparking a firestorm of reactions. Some praised Denzel for standing his ground, calling him a king who refused to be disrespected. Others criticized him, accusing him of overreacting to a harmless jab. "It's just late-night TV," one user posted. "Lighten up." Another countered, "Colbert crossed the line. Denzel called it out." Respect. The hashtags #DenzelWalks and #ColbertClash trended for days, racking up millions of views. Steven's team issued a statement the next morning, framing the moment as a misunderstanding and emphasizing their respect for Denzel. But the damage was done? Critics dissected the exchange, with some accusing Steven of leaning too hard into the difficult stereotype, a trope often unfairly applied to black actors who demand excellence. Others defended him, arguing that late-night TV thrives on pushing boundaries, and Denzel should have expected it. For his part, Denzel stayed silent. He didn't tweet, didn't give interviews, didn't fuel the fire. But those close to him knew this wasn't about ego. It was about principle. He'd spent his career navigating spaces where respect was hard-won, and he wasn't about to let a late-night host, even one as beloved as Stephen Colbert, diminish that. Weeks later, Stephen addressed the incident on air, his tone more somber than usual. "I've been doing this a long time," he said, looking directly into the camera, "and sometimes you miss the mark." I missed the mark that night. Denzel Washington is a legend, and I'm grateful for what he's given us on screen and off. The audience applauded, but the moment felt like a footnote to a larger conversation, one about respect, power, and the fine line between humor and harm. As for Denzel, he moved on. Redemption Road opened to strong reviews, and his performance was hailed as one of the year's best. But for those who'd been in the theater that night or who'd watched the clip online, the image of Denzel standing, removing his mic and walking off stage lingered. It wasn't just a moment. It was a statement.